Two men in tactical gear crept toward my daughter's window. Silent, precise, dangerous. A sudden flash exploded in the dark, and one dropped. The other ran, straight into my neighbor, who'd been waiting. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. It started like any other suburban Wednesday. I was washing dishes, humming to the soft rock station, when I saw them. Two men in stiff navy uniforms walked right up to my front door, clipboards in hand, sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun. "HOA inspection unit," they said flatly when I opened the door. That was my first red flag. We'd never had armed inspectors, and our Homeowners Association was barely functioning. Mostly old retirees arguing about lawn lengths. Still, they had documents, seal stamps, and an intimidating air. They said there was a compliance breach regarding unauthorized guests, and they needed to verify ID records, especially for underage occupants. My daughter, Ellie, had just turned 14. My heart skipped. Then they asked where she was. A chill ran through me, coiling low in my spine. Not, "Do you have children?" Not even, "Is your daughter home?" They went straight for it. "Where is she?" There was a precision in that question, clinical and unnerving, as if they'd already mapped our lives out in advance. I gripped the edge of the door a little tighter and forced a smile, the kind you wear at PTA meetings when someone's making passive-aggressive comments about snacks. "I'm not sure why that's relevant," I said slowly. "What exactly is this about?" The man on the left, taller, broader, with a faint scar bisecting his upper lip, didn't blink. "There's a report of unauthorized residency filed with your HOA. It's routine. Just need to confirm ages and identities of all occupants, particularly minors." His partner, wiry, twitchy, sunglasses never leaving my face, added, "Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. You can bring her to the door." Bring her to the door. I felt something primal stir in me, maternal instinct clashing with rational thought. This wasn't how any of this worked. No prior notice, no official HOA email. And what kind of residential association needed to see my child? I cleared my throat. "I'd like to verify this with our HOA board. You understand. Protocol." They exchanged a glance. Subtle, but unmistakable. The taller one's jaw flexed just once. The other gave a shallow nod, then clicked his pen against the clipboard like a metronome marking rising tension. "You can, but we'll be noting your refusal to cooperate," the tall one said. "That can escalate matters." A threat. Soft-spoken, professional, but a threat all the same. They left a bright orange citation slip wedged in the doorframe as they turned and walked off. Stiff, measured, mechanical. I stood there in my doorway long after they were gone, fingers trembling slightly against the paper. Some part of me already knew something was very wrong. I told them I wasn't comfortable giving that information. One of them stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, refusal to comply with HOA inspection protocol can result in a fine or further legal action." Legal action? For my daughter? They left a warning slip that looked suspiciously like a parking ticket, all vague legalese and bold red fonts. I called our HOA president, Mr. Adler. He had no idea who these people were. No inspections had been scheduled. No special units existed. When I looked up from the call, they were back. In our backyard. I raced outside. "Get out of here," I shouted. "We're just verifying residence records," one of them said coldly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I called the police. They left before the squad arrived. That night, Ellie slept in my room. I didn't sleep at all. I sat at the edge of the bed, the glow from my phone casting cold light across my hands. Every instinct in my body was on high alert, as if my veins were pumping electricity instead of blood. I'd seen enough crime shows, read enough headlines to know when something felt off. And this wasn't just off. It was calculated, coordinated, predatory. My mind retraced every second of the afternoon, rewinding and reanalyzing like a malfunctioning tape stuck on a disturbing loop. The way they spoke, so measured, with no hesitation. The forged authority, wrapped in just enough plausible detail to make me second-guess my gut. And then, bold enough to come into my backyard while I was still on the phone, that wasn't arrogance. That was confidence. Confidence that they had a system, a rhythm. Confidence that no one would stop them. I glanced at Ellie, curled up under my comforter, her arm wrapped around the stuffed fox she hadn't slept with in years. She'd pretended not to be scared. Asked, "Do you want me to sleep with you so you don't get lonely?" Like it was her idea. But I saw her eyes after dinner, darting toward the back door, checking the lock. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a glass box under surveillance. I pulled every curtain, slid every deadbolt, and still couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from just beyond the reach of the porch light. When the police finally showed up, over an hour late, I gave them everything. Descriptions, names, if they were real, the fake violation notice. One officer scribbled half-hearted notes, while the other asked if I had a ring cam. I did, but the angle didn't catch their faces. "We'll keep an eye out," the officer said. Then they left. Just like that. And I was alone again, staring into the dark. Over the next 24 hours, I tried to keep it together. I installed a new lock, checked the security cam, nothing usable, they stayed just out of sight, and kept Ellie home from school. Then I remembered. Mark. Mark had lived across the street for years. Ex-military, I think. Quiet, unassuming, spent most of his time fixing cars in his garage. I swallowed my pride and walked over. I didn't expect much, maybe some advice or a second pair of eyes on the neighborhood. Instead, Mark went dead serious the moment I mentioned the fake HOA cops. "You're being watched," he said. "And these guys, they're not amateurs." "How do you know?" He didn't answer. He just went inside and came back with a duffel bag. Black, military issued, full of gear. "Because they used this same routine in Mosul, 2004. They're predators." Mark's voice wasn't loud, but it landed like a blunt weapon. I stood there on the edge of his driveway, surrounded by the oily scent of motor grease and grass clippings. But everything in me suddenly felt suspended, as if gravity had let go for a moment. His eyes had shifted too, no longer the sleepy, neighborly gaze of a man who tinkered with transmissions and drank cheap beer on Sundays. They were sharp now, clear, familiar with shadows most of us never knew existed. "I saw their posture," he said, kneeling beside the duffel, unzipping it with the practiced ease of muscle memory. That clipboard wasn't just for show. It was a concealment. Probably had a weapon inside or a stun device. The tall one's stance, textbook cover and control technique, and the twitchy one was scanning your periphery the whole time. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He continued. "This isn't some prank or overzealous HOA nonsense. This is a pattern. Seen it overseas more than once. Guys with just enough authority to look official, but not enough oversight to be held accountable. They prey on hesitation, civilian confusion." He started laying items out on the workbench beside us. Flashlight, tactical gloves, something that looked like a tiny camera on a flexible cable. The air around him changed, calm but coiled, like a storm waiting for its cue. "They isolate targets," he continued. "Probe for resistance. If it's weak, they escalate. If it's strong, they delay. Regroup." "And they're regrouping now?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. Mark finally looked up at me again. "No," he said. "They're assessing. They're trying to decide how much you know, how close you are to exposing them, which means you have a window. A window for what? To make damn sure they don't come back. Mark sprang into action. It was like flipping a switch. He helped me set up decoys. Ellie would stay at his house while a mannequin went into her bed. Cameras went up on every corner of our property, and motion sensors were hidden in the bushes. Mark rigged a silent alarm. That night, around 3:17 a.m., it triggered. Mark was already in position, tucked behind my SUV. I watched the camera feed from inside. 2 figures in tactical gear, not uniforms, but dark clothing and backpacks, were sneaking toward Ellie's room. They tried the window. That's when Mark made his move. A flashbang blinded them. He tackled the first guy before he could even scream. The second ran. But Mark had already anticipated it. He pinned him behind the shed within minutes. When the police arrived, both suspects were zip-tied on my lawn, groaning. The footage played back like a high-stakes thriller, except this time I was in it, a helpless spectator with the volume turned all the way up on my own fear. The silent alarm had vibrated through my phone like a jolt of lightning, and in the space between heartbeats, Mark was gone, swallowed by the dark, weapon-drawn, steps silent. The figures emerged out of nowhere, black-clad, swift, precise, no wasted motion, not a word between them. One took point while the other flanked the side of the house, splitting like trained wolves approaching a den. Their coordination made my skin crawl. This wasn't a test run. They weren't casing. They were executing. The moment the lead figure reached the bedroom window, crouching low with a tool in hand, Mark struck. The flashbang hit first, a burst of searing white light and a thunderclap that vibrated through the walls. I flinched instinctively behind the couch, even though I'd known it was coming. By the time I peeked out, the first man was already face down in the dirt. Mark's knee jammed into the base of his spine with unrelenting force. The second bolted for the fence, but Mark anticipated the route. He didn't chase in a straight line. He cut across the yard, fast and low, like a panther closing in. I watched from the back window, breath locked in my chest, as he tackled the runner into the dew-wet grass behind the shed with surgical efficiency. No drama, no wasted energy, just brutal, controlled precision. When the red and blue lights finally spun across our cul-de-sac, I realized I was shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from the crashing aftermath of adrenaline. The suspects were cuffed, grunting and dazed, while the officers exchanged glances that couldn't hide their surprise. Mark stood in the middle of it all, blood on his sleeve, face calm. He looked at me and said just one thing, low and quiet, but it rang through me like a siren. "Don't ever second-guess your instincts again." Turns out these weren't random psychos. They were former private security contractors who had been running an illegal child retrieval scam. The fake HOA unit was a cover. They'd pretend to be investigating non-compliance, identify vulnerable families, and stage late-night interventions. They sold the children into underground custody rings, masked as alternative adoption services. They'd done this in 3 states already. But they picked the wrong block this time. Mark. He had been special forces, yes. But more than that, he'd worked counterintelligence after retirement. He spotted their tactics a mile away. "I've seen wolves in sheep's clothing," he said. "You were right to be afraid, but you weren't alone." The more I learned, the more my stomach turned. It wasn't just the crime. It was the systematic nature of it. These men weren't deranged loners or desperate criminals. They were professionals, trained and disciplined, who had taken everything they'd learned from war zones and corporate security and turned it inward, against their own people, against families. They had tools, forged documentation, entire fake HOA websites, even burner phone hotlines routed to fake call centers where compliance officers posed as legitimate personnel. If someone questioned the inspection, they'd be redirected to a smooth-talking operator who reaffirmed everything with bureaucratic confidence. It was a shell game designed to disorient, to delay victims long enough for the real crime to happen. What sickened me most was how targeted it all was. They didn't choose rich neighborhoods with cameras on every mailbox. They went for places like ours, mid-tier suburbs where people still left their garage doors open in the afternoon, where HOAs were more nuisance than authority, and where the line between neighbor and stranger was just wide enough to slip through. They had a whole system. The local PD confirmed this wasn't their first operation and likely wouldn't have been their last. In Michigan, a girl went missing from a gated community. Her mother told police 2 child services contractors had visited a week earlier. In Arizona, a boy vanished from his backyard. Neighbors remembered seeing men in dark uniforms days prior, checking fence compliance. No one made the connection until now, and Mark, stoic, private, always under the radar, had seen it all before. He'd spent years dismantling networks like this overseas, watching governments turn blind eyes, civilians disappear, justice traded for efficiency. He'd retired, thinking he'd left that world behind. But it had followed him back, crawled into our cul-de-sac disguised as paper pushers and clipboard holders. He didn't say it aloud, but I saw it in his eyes. This wasn't just about protecting me or Ellie. It was about redemption, about finishing something that had haunted him long before our story began. "They underestimated you," I told him quietly. "No," he said. "They underestimated us." The story made local news. The HOA was horrified. Mark refused interviews, said he didn't need the attention. Ellie eventually went back to school, but she kept sleeping with the lights on for weeks. As for me, I installed a new security system, joined the HOA board myself, and kept my daughter close. I asked Mark why he helped. He could have ignored me, let the cops handle it. He just shrugged. Because good neighbors don't wait for tragedy to strike. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, or even badges. They wear grease-stained flannel shirts, keep to themselves, and wait patiently for the moment they're needed. And when that moment comes, they don't miss. In the weeks that followed, life slowly resumed its shape, though never quite the same. Ellie would laugh again, but there was a caution behind it now, like a child who's learned too early that monsters don't always live under beds. They can knock on your door, smile, and call themselves inspectors. I found myself studying people more closely. The delivery driver who lingered at the curb a little too long, the new neighbor with mirrored sunglasses and no name on the mailbox. My innocence, or maybe my illusion of safety, had been broken. And in its place, a sharper, colder awareness settled in. The neighborhood changed too, not in big, sweeping ways, but in glances, in conversations that trailed off too soon. People asked questions, then didn't want the answers. The HOA held an emergency vote to increase neighborhood patrols and background checks for all representatives. But the truth was plain. We'd all been caught sleeping. Everyone except Mark. He returned to his routines like nothing had happened. I'd catch glimpses of him under the hood of an old truck or sitting on his porch with his dog, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug he always used. He never brought it up. The raid, the takedown, the men he restrained like it was just another Tuesday. And maybe for him it was. I asked him again one evening, standing at the edge of his driveway, why he stepped in, why he risked himself. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Didn't always know which side I was on, but when it's your own street, your own people, there's no gray, just right and wrong." That stayed with me. There's a comfort in knowing someone like Mark lives across the street, not just because he saved my daughter, but because he reminded me that quiet strength still exists, that not every man with a scarred face and oil-stained hands is broken. Some are forged, and while the rest of us run from danger, they step into it, not for recognition, not for glory, but because they know someone has to.